Good morning, this is Lee, here, with the stories I believe most conservatives will want to know in the morning. Today is January 20th, 2022. The stories late night on Wednesday and early this morning were largely about Joe Biden holding a 2-hour press conference. Many people were shocked, dismayed, and embarrassed. Even some Democrats. Generally, the president butchered some of his points and answers to questions. He paused a bit, excruciatingly so. But Biden also was surprisingly frank about Republicans trouncing the Democrats in the next election cycle. Or was that a mistake? Surprising, also, was that he lasted about 2 hours. Of course, he spat out some cranky criticisms of the press and embarrassed himself a few times. The Daily Caller reported that a panel of CNN hosts pointed out there is a lot to clean up. This referred to what the State Department will need to do, i.e., clean up a lot of what Biden tripped over in the press conference regarding Ukraine. On Breitbart, Ted Cruz is quoted as calling Biden's performance as incoherent and catastrophic. Most, on the left and the right, thought he gave a summary green light to Putin to make small, quote, incursions into the sovereign country. CNN is laughable. On Breitbart and TheHill.com, there were comments about how the president hinted at illegitimate elections both future and past. Specifically, CNN anchor Dana Bash was surprised that Joe Biden hints that elections, quote, will be illegitimate. This makes one infer that the last election was, quote, corrupt. TheHill.com had a good analysis from legal scholar Jonathan Turley about how the Democrats' big lie is an effort to sow doubt about the coming elections as a way of telegraphing their readiness to fight the results of upcoming, losing elections, which do, honestly, look like a deluge of Republican candidates winning. Newsmax reporter James Rosen asked a bold question during the press conference to the president. He asked, why do you suppose such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? President Biden answered, I have no idea. Hat tip, the Gateway Pundit news report. Also on Breitbart, liberals, James Carville and Van Jones had differing opinions. Carville says, Biden had stamina. Van Jones, on the other hand, says, Biden was foggy and meandering. The Gateway Pundit had an article about the Arizona election results should be, quote, decertified. This was a comment from Arizona State Representative Mark Finchem. Also from the Gateway Pundit was an article about the voting rights bill failing in the Senate yesterday, 51-49. TGP aptly calls this the Dems' ballot harvesting, midnight Dropbox, election fraud legislation. In other election news, there is a story involving the Pennsylvania Secretary of State, Dominion of Voting Machines, and Democrat machinations. One poignant comment was from an independent auditor. Remember this, as an international auditor who performed hundreds of audits around the world, I have never seen or heard about an auditee refusing to be audited. My comment is, what could go wrong? On Zero Hedge, there were some interesting stories about global threats as well as the Russian versus Ukrainian conflict. For instance, the U.S. has double carrier group deployments to the South China Sea versus a year before. This is due to the focus of the Pentagon on China. And Rabobank analyst Michael Every wrote a meandering comment but also had a comment that was similar to my comment from yesterday regarding the Russian ability to move through Belarus. He said, quote, worse, the EU and Wall Street cannot avoid being dragged into the Ukraine mess. In a worst-case scenario, Russia plows through the Suwalki Gap to Kaliningrad, bisecting the EU, and leaving 3 members with Russian minorities encircled, and ends up on Romania's border via Transnistria. We will see millions of refugees flood west. And perhaps, the U.S. threats to fund the Ukrainian insurgency, as in Soviet-controlled Afghanistan, and are based in the eastern EU, which sees Moscow focusing on it. Or the EU shrugs, the U.S. shrugs too, and walks away. Michael Every continues, the former Estonian president is also not holding back on Twitter. He said, I think you get the whole stinking awfulness perfectly. The weakness of the West, its smarmy pointless rhetoric to cover self-interest, mediocre, talentless leadership and amazing depths of political cowardice. You can find this in paragraph number 8. Finally, Zero Hedge has an article entitled, quote, illegals can now use arrest warrants as identification to fly, according to the TSA. Yes, that says it all. An arrest warrant is as good as a passport. That's all for today. Please look at the links below, and in the printouts which can be found on my website. Also, please let me thank voicegenerator.io because you would not like to hear my voice on the video. In the near future, I will issue this as a podcast as well as a video. But you can find this printout on my website, therightovernightnews.wordpress.com, and please consider advertising with me. Thanks very much, Lee.